Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Gene Young, who began working in the civil rights movement in the spring of 1963 with his arrest at the age of 12 in Jackson, Mississippi. He was enrolled at Jackson State in the spring of 1970 and was witness to the aftermath of the shootings on May 15, 1970. He remains an organizer to this day and is currently the acting director of the Margaret Walker Alexander Research Center, a center for the study of African American life and history. This is his third year joining us here. Please welcome Gene Young.
I know it's been a long day, and I was beginning to wonder if they remember they had invited me to speak here today. On July 18th through the 21st at Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi, the National Freedom Riders Conference will be held commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Freedom Rides, which began on May 4th, 1961. And there's some literature there on the table with the sign, "Long Live the Spirit of Kenton Jackson State," for those of you who are interested in attending this 30th commemoration of the National Freedom Riders Conference. To the May 4th Task Force, the May 4th Center, Alan Canfora, Kendra Hicks, to the families of the martyrs of May 4th, and to each of you who have returned to this hallowed and historic site. A week from Monday, on May 13th, Stevie Wonder will celebrate his 41st birthday. His words have always been a source of inspiration, and if I'm fortunate, I will be celebrating my 41st birthday in September. And I believe that Stevie Wonder was writing about me in his song, "Living for the City," where he writes, "A boy is born in Hard Time, Mississippi, surrounded by four walls that ain't so pretty. His parents give him love and affection to keep him strong and moving in the right direction. And I hope today that you will hear inside my voice of sorrow, and that it motivates you to make a better tomorrow. This place is cold, nowhere could be much colder, and if we don't change, soon this world will be over." Growing up in Jackson, Mississippi, I had the pleasure of knowing the late Medgar Wiley Evers, who died tragically in June of 1963 in Jackson. And later that summer, after spending a period in jail for my participation in civil rights demonstrations, I had the opportunity of being one of the youngest on a busload of freedom fighters to go to our nation's capital to hear Dr. Martin Luther King speak on that day in August of 1963. And I was thrilled by the fact that I was a part of the multitude which had come to Washington. And the words of Dr. Martin Luther King were inspiring and instructive, and I was proud to be from Jackson, Mississippi. Dr. King said, "As we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall march ahead. We must not turn back. And there are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will the Negro be satisfied? And we can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the city. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote, and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." The words of the preacher from Atlanta made me proud of the fact that I was a participant in this momentous movement. And Dr. King went on to say that I'm not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells. Some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. And go back to Mississippi. Go back to Alabama. Go back to South Carolina. Go back to Georgia. Go back to Louisiana. Go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. It was not long after returning to Jackson and celebrating my 13th birthday, one of the most horrible and vicious acts in human history took place in Birmingham, Alabama. The entire country was shocked, saddened, and shaken by the September Sunday morning bombing deaths of Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, Cynthia Wesley, all age 14, and Denise McNair, age 11. I'm sure that those 4 little girls thought that they would live to see forever, but for them, forever came so soon and so sudden. And it was then that I decided to enjoy life and to do my very best each day, because the tragedy of that Sunday morning bombing in Birmingham made me wake up and realize that there's no guarantee that we will be here tomorrow. And 7 years later, on an all-black college campus in Mississippi, students protesting the war in Southeast Asia, the shootings here at Kent State, and the deaths of blacks all shot in the back in Augusta, Georgia, a few days after Kent State and before the shootings at Jackson State. I was a witness to the aftermath of racist police repression in Mississippi. Racism was and continues to be a deathly, debilitating, and devastating reality for too many in the African American community. So today, again, I am honored to be here where the dreams of 4 students were deferred, and I work on a campus where 2 weeks following the deaths of Allison Krauss, William Schroeder, Sandra Shure, and Jeffrey Glenn Miller, the dreams of 2 young black men were deferred, Philip Lafayette Gibbs and James Earl Green. Tim Spofford, in his book, Lynch Street, the May 1970 shootings at Jackson State College, gives a detailed and accurate account of the events which took place on that murderous Mississippi morning almost 21 years ago. And he mentions Jughead, an ex-civil rights worker who tried to calm his fellow classmates by giving them renditions of some of Dr. King's speeches. You may not have been at Kent State 21 years ago or at Jackson State, but this too is a part of our collective history. It is not an anti-war protest history. It is not a history of the student movement. It is not history of the African American experience. It is a history of the human experience. And history read right is a dangerous and desperately serious business. It is the totalizing force that seizes you and throws you down here instead of there, with this color instead of that color, with this task instead of that task. It does not mean, as some people say, that you have a certain history. You don't have that history. That history has you. And more precisely, you are that history. And there's nothing you can do in history that will free you of the historical responsibility of being born at a certain time in a certain place with a certain skin color. There is meaning, there is historical meaning in that fact, and you cannot, no matter what you do, escape the meaning history gave you and that history demands from you. Today, we are called upon to give meaning to that history. Dr. King reminded us long ago that we are all important on God's keyboard. From bass black to treble white, we are all precious in His sight. And no one of us can do everything, but each of us can do something. And when we involve ourselves in efforts to improve the human condition, we keep the dream alive. We honor the martyrs of May 1970. Senator Robert Kennedy, who died shortly after Dr. King in 1968, stated that few of us will have the opportunity to be in history itself, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events, and in the total of all those acts will be written the history of this generation. Each man or woman who stands up for an ideal or acts to strike out to improve the lots of others or strikes out against injustice sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and the time is always right to protest for that which is right. So today, even if it doesn't fall your lot to be in one of the so-called big professions, we should all be inspired to do our very best. We honor the memory of May 1970 and keep the dream alive when we give our best to efforts that will make this world a little bit better. So I encourage you to be the best. If you can do your best, perhaps you will be inspired by the words that were written by long ago, that we should do our job so well that the dead, the living, and the unborn could do it no better. If it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted, like Shakespeare wrote poetry, like Beethoven composed music, sweep streets so well that all the host of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived the great street sweeper who swept his job well. If you can't be a pine on the top of the hill, be a shrub in the valley, but be the best little shrub by the side of the hill. Be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you can't be a highway, be a trail. If you can't be the sun, be a star. It isn't by size that you win or fail, but be the best of whatever you are. The tragedy in life does not lie in not reaching your goal. The tragedy lies in having no goal to reach for. It is not a calamity to die with dreams unfulfilled, but it is a calamity not to dream. It is not a disaster not to be unable to capture your ideal, but it is a disaster to have no ideal to capture. It is not a disgrace not to reach the stars, but it is a disgrace to have no stars to reach for. Not failure, but low aim is sin. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past 3 years, I've been fortunate to be invited by the May 4th Task Force. In some way, the Kent State family has become a part of my extended family. And before returning to Mississippi, I would like to express my sincere thanks and heartfelt appreciation to all of those concerned and conscientious individuals who have kept alive the spirit of Kent and Jackson State, and to the families and friends and schoolmates of the martyrs of May 4th. I'll leave you with the words of Stevie Wonder, which I shared with the families of Philip Gibbs and James Green as we brought to a conclusion the 20th anniversary program of the shootings at Jackson State last year. And again, to those who have been here, who've been involved, and who've encouraged me throughout the year. Stevie Wonder writes, as around the sun the earth knows she's revolving, and the rosebuds know to bloom in early May, just as hate knows love's the cure, you can rest your mind assured that I'll be loving you always. As now can't reveal the mystery of tomorrow, but in passing will grow older every day, just as all is born is new. Do know what I say is true, that I'll be loving you always. Until the rainbow burns the stars out in the sky, until the ocean covers every mountain high, until the dolphin flies and parrots live at sea, until we dream of life and life becomes a dream. Did you know that true love asks for nothing? Her acceptance is the way that we pay. Did you know that life has given love a guarantee to last through forever and another day? Just as time knew to move on since the beginning, and the seasons know exactly when to change, just as kindness knows no shame, know through all your joy and pain that I'll be loving you always. As today I know I'm living, but tomorrow could make me the past, but that I mustn't fear, for I'll know deep in my mind the love of me I've left behind, and I'll be loving you always, until the day is night and night becomes the day, until the trees and seas just up and fly away, until that day that 8 times 8 times 8 is 4, until that day that is the day that are no more, until the day the earth starts turning right to left, until the earth just for the sun denies itself, I'll be loving you always. We all know that sometimes life hates and troubles can make you wish that you were born in another time and space, but you can bet your lifetimes that and twice it's double, that God knew exactly where he wanted you to be placed. So make sure when you say you're in it but not of it, you're not helping to make this earth a place sometimes called hell. Change your words into truth and change the truth into love, and maybe our children's grandchildren and their great-grandchildren can tell. Long live the spirit of Kent and Jackson State.